In the context of his official visit to China, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva highlights the role of his country in the construction of a new multipolar world. In France, social and trade union organizations demonstrate in front of the Constitutional Council ahead of its rule on the legality of the pension reform imposed by Emmanuel Macron's government. Saudi Arabia and Syria confirmed in a joint statement that they have initiated the steps to resume consular services in both countries, as well as flights connecting the two countries. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. The former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, formally assumed on Thursday the presidency of the New BRICS Development Bank during an inauguration ceremony in the city of Shanghai. In the presence of the Brazilian head of state, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Rousseff formally assumed the leadership of the fund intended to grant loans, financing and technical assistance for projects of the members of the economic bloc and other developing countries. Dilma will finish the 5-year term of her predecessor, Marcos Troillo, appointed by Jair Bolsonaro in 2020, and will remain in office until July 6, 2025. In her dissertation, Dilma highlighted the importance of the bloc formed by Brazil, China, Russia, South Africa and India for global development. We move on to other topics. The Legislative Assembly of El Salvador extended for the 13th time the state of emergency for more than 30 days, despite reports of arbitrary detentions and human rights violations. The measure, which has already been in place for a year, was extended on Wednesday night with the votes of 66 deputies, so that it will continue until the end of May. The initiative, called by the government of President Nayib Bukele a war against gangs, suspends several constitutional rights and was originally approved in March 2022 after an escalation of murders attributed to armed gangs. As a result of the approval of the exceptional regime, more than 67,000 people have been detained, according to official figures. However, international bodies, opposition figures and parties, and several organizations denounce arbitrary detentions and human rights violations. In Chile, citizens marched in rejection of the Naim Retamal law, described as repressive by several social movements. The various organizations mobilized, among them the Union of Workers of the National Human Rights Institute, warned that this norm promotes a very high level of impunity and creates a scenario in which the victims of human rights violations are left without justice. The text creates the concept of privileged legitimate defense, which grants procedural advantages to carabineros, investigators or members of the armed forces when they should, if their judgment, their life and physical integrity or that of third parties are in danger. The controversial initiative, which has now become law, was discussed and approved in record time in the chambers of senators and deputies after the death on duty of non-commissioned officer Rita Olivares. In Venezuela, Tibisay Lucena, the former president of the National Electoral Council and Minister of Higher Education, passed away on Wednesday. The information was published by the Vice President Delcy Rodriguez through her Twitter account. President Nicolás Maduro Moros expressed his sorrow for the physical departure of Lucena and sent his condolences to her relatives and friends. Tibisay Lucena was a Venezuelan politician, graduated from the Central University of Venezuela, and she served as president of the National Electoral Council from 2006 to 2020, and finally in 2021 she was appointed as Minister of Higher Education.
There, our country began to know the name of a woman who was capable of standing out for her brilliance and intelligence. And that name was the name of the President of the National Electoral Council, Tibisay Lucena, who came to lead for many years the electoral power of the country. we can say that Tibisay was the head, brilliant, in the construction of the new electoral power. The fifth constitutional power established in the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. If anyone marked all the institutional functioning, all the construction of an impeccable system of absolute guarantees, political, technological guarantees, and absolute transparency of the electoral systems existing today in Venezuela, that person's full name is Tibisay Lucena, the brilliant president of the National Electoral Council.
In Colombia, the march, led by the indigenous people of Valle del Cauca, arrives in Bogotá to ratify the defense of indigenous people's rights in the rejection of structural and racial discrimination. After an 18-hour walk, the first stop will be the Ministry of the Interior, where the groups will expose the situation of vulnerability in their territories. The Minga, a social walk, took place after the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia denounced the systematic and generalized non-compliance of the national government with respect to the agreements signed in the context of the prior consultation of the National Development Plan 2022-2026. The union ratified that it will continue to promote the transformations that the country requires, a home where all Colombians can enjoy fundamental rights. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on our TikTok at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other studies coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. On Thursday, French social and trade union organizations demonstrated in front of the Constitutional Council in Paris, which on Friday will rule on the legality of the pension reform imposed by the government of Emmanuel Macron. The demonstration is taking place outside the so-called Council of the Wise, which this Friday will rule on the constitutionality of the reform. This instance is seen by the unions as the last resort to prevent the controversial legislation from enacting. However, experts affirm that this body will only give a semblance on legitimacy to a reform imposed by force. During the morning of this 12th day of mobilizations, demonstrators blocked access to the building, and last month Macron's government approved by decree and without a vote in parliament a pension reform that raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. And Russia marked Cosmonautics Day on Wednesday, celebrating the day of the first crewed space flight. The record was set in 1961 by a 27-year-old Russian-Soviet cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin. Gagarin's 108-minute mission took the space age to a new level and marked a historic achievement for the Soviet Union, which beat the United States in a tight race to launch a man beyond the Earth's atmosphere. For the Soviet people, Gagarin's space flight was a triumph comparable to the victory over the Germans in the World War II. Since April the 12th, 1961, it has remained a source of national pride, a symbol of courage and technological prowess. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin met on Wednesday at the Kremlin with the CEO of the Russian state space corporation Roscosmos, Yuri Borisov. The meeting took place on Cosmonautics Day, a celebration to commemorate the first man in space. Later on, at an evening gala, Putin praised Russia's 100 accident-free space launches in a row, a feat that the president considers a record in modern history. The International Space Station, which has served as a symbol of post-Cold War international cooperation, is now one of the last remaining areas of cooperation between Russia and the West amid the tensions over Moscow's military operation in Ukraine. NASA and its partners hope to continue operating the International Space Station until 2030. Now we move on to other topics. Russian military discovered at least 240 pathogens of dangerous diseases in 4 Ukrainian laboratories. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, most of the pathogens found are related to anthrax and cholera diseases. Also, the Defense Ministry revealed that these infectious agent development facilities are operated by the military program of the United States Defense Threat Reduction Agency. According to the information, these biological facilities were located in the regions of Lugansk, Donetsk, and Kherson. The presence of these laboratories, so far as the Russian army is concerned, proves that the United States creates biological weapons components in Ukraine and other countries. On Wednesday, UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric informed that according to the Joint Coordination Center, routine inspections under the Black Sea Grain Initiative were conducted. The official called on all parties involved to meet their responsibilities.
According to our colleagues at the Joint Coordination Centers, they tell us that routine inspections under the Black Sea Grain Initiatives were conducted today. Following intensive discussions within the framework of the JCC, supported obviously by ourselves and by Turkey. Our message is clear, is that we urge all involved to meet their responsibilities to ensure that vessels continue to move smoothly and safely in the interest of global food security.
According to the spokesperson, the UN is also continuing efforts to see the full implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding between Russia and the United Nations relating to the export of Russian food and fertilizers.
We are also continuing our efforts to see the full implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding between Russia and the United Nations relating to the export of Russian food and fertilizer. And Ms. Greenspan and her team are continuing actively to engage all the relevant parties on that, because that also needs to be fully implemented.
Russian Foreign Ministry's spokesperson Maria Zakharova held a press conference on Wednesday after being asked if the U.S. State Department had made any attempt to negotiate the exchange of Wall Street Journal reported Ivan Gershkovich, arrested in Russia on espionage charges. The Foreign Ministry official said the following.
We can see some strange dynamic of the creation of noise at the suggestion of the U.S. authorities or some other bodies on this situation. Apparently, they believe that if they make noise as loud as possible, hood whistle, then somehow it will help them. Well, they probably forgot the experience of their previous period, when this situation did not help at all. There are appropriate channels, there are appropriate authorities. They should deal with these issues, no one else.
Zakharova also referred to Washington's denial of its involvement in the sabotage on the Russia to Germany pipelines.
An attempt of the U.S. side to get off the voiced facts with an energetic denial, spreading various fabrications and versions through the media, like the involvement of private companies. Some people in Kiev, in Warsaw, coupled with the slurred explanations of the U.S. satellites, in fact, confirmed the version of Hirsch. We insist on conducting a comprehensive, open international investigation with the mandatory participation of Russian experts. We proceed from the premise that all those involved in the explosions on the Nord Stream pipelines will definitely be identified, and the details of this crime will be revealed. Russia will do everything possible for this, will do everything necessary to prevent the collective West from drowning out this topic.
TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries using StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In a joint statement issued on Thursday, Saudi Arabia and Syria's foreign ministers welcomed the beginning of procedures to resume consular services and the flights between the two countries. The announcement came as Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Mekdad wrapped up his visit to Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, the first time since the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011. During their meetings, the foreign ministers also discussed the necessary steps to achieve comprehensive political resolution to the Syrian crisis. According to the Syrian Foreign Ministry, both nations agreed to resume the consular services and the flights between them, stressing that both sides have agreed on boosting security and counter-terrorism efforts. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Gutierrez called for massive international support for Somalia during his visit to the country, which came as it faces its worst drought in decades. The Secretary-General met in Mogadishu with representatives of Somali civil society organizations working in women's affairs and empowerment, climate change, persons with disabilities, youth and marginalized groups, and said he was deeply inspired by their vision and energy. Gutierrez said the nation was dealing with humanitarian difficulties while at the same time also combating a serious terrorism threat. Last year, Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud launched a major offensive against irregular armed groups and claims to have killed 3,000 Al-Shabaab fighters since the campaign was launched.
Last visit to Somalia in 2017 was during a large-scale humanitarian operation to prevent famine. Today, the situation is once again alarming. Climate change is causing chaos. Somalia has experienced 5 consecutive poor rainy seasons, and this is unprecedented. Between now and June, 6.5 million Somalis are expected to face high levels of acute food insecurity. So the risk of famine is still looming.
At least 10 asylum seekers were killed in Tunisia when a boat carrying asylum seekers to Europe from sub-Saharan Africa capsized. The Coast Guard reported the recovery of 76 asylum seekers from Africa and the foiling of 2 illegal sea crossing operations in the north of the country. The spokesperson for the local court investigating this case detailed that more than 20 migrants are missing after the shipwreck. At the end of March, the bodies of 29 other asylum seekers were recovered after 3 separate shipwrecks off the coast of Tunisia. Tunisian police used tear gas to disperse about 100 African asylum seekers and migrants who had been camping outside the headquarters of the UN Refugee Agency in Tunis for some 25 days. A spokesperson for the Tunisian Interior Ministry said the police had intervened at the request of the UN agency and that 80 asylum seekers had been arrested. In an open letter, the group of migrants from 15 sub-Saharan countries said they had taken refuge near the building after being chased out of several Tunisian cities following a February speech by President Kais Saied slamming illegal migration. On April the 3rd, the UN Refugee Agency announced it had stopped all registration and pre-registration activities from March 31st to April 17th due to a migration of the registration and identity system. Malian migrant Famouza Koira said many asylum seekers were increasingly frustrated over the long wait for their cases to be dealt with by the UN agency. A Kenyan court is considering a bid by Facebook's parent company Meta to drop a lawsuit accusing the company of exploitation and poor working conditions. The social network's parent company seeks to have the case dismissed, arguing that the country's court has no jurisdiction over Meta as the conglomerate is not based or trading in the African nation. In March, 43 social network moderators in Kenya filed a lawsuit against Meta for unlawful dismissal. Previously, in December 2022, the company was accused of fueling ethnic hatred and online violence in Kenya and Ethiopia. A fund of $1.6 million is being requested to compensate the victims while legal proceedings continue. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.